Gurmeen Maga, thanks very much for the presentation and for being here, and the appendix is quite useful as well. My first question relates to an issue I raised previously with the Planning and Building Unit, and that is to do with the provision of school halls. There's about 10%, as I understand it, of post-primary schools do not have a hall. And I have come across instances of schools that have been seeking to. My best understanding of the situation, and maybe you can clarify this for me, is that the department is reluctant to provide funding for school halls, or at least it's not the highest priority for the department, unless there is a very significant redevelopment happening. And for schools that are trying to extend somewhat and add a hall and things like that, that's very often not on offer, and what is offered is the kind of large multi-purpose room, which is not suitable for PE and so on. And it's probably, not as beneficial to the school either in terms of hiring it out. Now, under Healthy Ireland, there are particular targets in terms of physical activity. There's also the objective to ensure that PE is offered as an exam subject to all schools. So I suppose I think I have a reasonable understanding of the department's current position, or the position as it was heretofore. Has the department given any consideration to opening up a new funding stream for school halls, to revising the position as previously was the case? I think it is important that we ensure that every child, at post-primary level at least, has access to a hall and has the ability. Look, it's a very wet country, often a cold country, that they have the opportunity to continue to participate in PE regardless of the weather. So that's my first question.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy. The provision of PE halls, it's an important commitment under the programme for government. It's also an important commitment under Project Ireland 2040, and the National Development Plan is the funding mechanism to deliver on the particular priorities in there. So I suppose that there isn't a separate stream of funding in that regard. The NDP is our funding stream, and as I said earlier in my statement, there's a 4.4 billion capital programme funding stream to cover the period 21 to 25. Like in terms of where schools are currently, like there's about 80% of post-primary schools that have a PE hall, and another 10% have access to one nearby. So as you say, there's 10% then that's residual, and most of that residual is for schools that are smaller schools, at post-primary level. But I suppose just to note that point. In terms of, we are delivering PE halls as part of our capital programme. So when we build new post-primary schools, we provide a PE hall. When we do a large-scale refurbishment and extension at a school, we provide a PE hall as part of that. You're correct, Deputy, that when we're doing other smaller scale projects, the PE hall isn't necessarily part of the brief for that. And I suppose when you look at that residual, there's probably a few elements to that. One, we're looking to see, and linking in with our colleagues in our Department of Sport, looking at what are the wider facilities in the community locally, to see what opportunities there are there for alignment and to achieve best value for state funding generally. And we'd have some of our staff as part of the steering groups there. The other thing, I suppose, that we're conscious of as well as we look forward in terms of PE hall provision and dealing with that retrofit and residual, we have the bigger picture to look at as well in the context of deep energy retrofit programme and how that aligns, so that if we think as part of the overall school buildings that are there currently in those schools that don't have a PE hall, is the long-term trajectory for that school a deep energy retrofit of the existing building, or is it involving a demolish and rebuild? And that then can feed into the considerations in relation to what's the best way forward in terms of dealing with the PE hall issue. So there's certain complexities. It's not as simple as, but certainly it is a commitment under the programme for government. It is a commitment under Project Ireland 2040. But I'm also conscious that in dealing with the commitments that we have currently, there's a lot of priorities we have to manage in terms of special needs We've a lot of Ukrainian children into our schools currently. We've increasing demographics at post-primary as well. So it's managing all of the collective priorities as best as possible.
Okay, look, I have limited time left. I suppose what I'm hearing there is that, a school building project nearly has to pass a certain threshold, and if you're looking at a school that may need to be completely retrofitted at some stage rather than you're not at the minute looking at a hall. I'm going to give you 3 just examples. I'm not going to name them because I haven't permission to do that, but just to give you a sense of the kind of situations we're talking about. I'm thinking of a city centre school that have to get on a bus, albeit not a huge school, about 230 or something like that. They have to get on a bus for PE. There's another school relatively close by. They also have to get on a bus. 1970s Christian Brothers School type building. That kind of I'm sure you're familiar with the type of building, big thick walls. Probably could do with a retrofit, but massive school now, significantly expanded. Looking at getting a hall, can't get a hall. And a new primary school, new build, and all that they're being offered, be it's different as primary school, all they're being offered is that multi-purpose room. And I think that's very disappointing for a school that might have campaigned for a long time. So I think this needs to be looked at again. I think we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here, and that a school could go another 10 years without a school hall, and I don't think that's desirable in the context of the obesity crisis and everything else that we're trying to face down. In a minute, I might get a chance to come in later, but just a very brief question with the time I have left. The demographic bulge is moving into post-primary. Roughly how many additional post-primary schools are we going to need in the next 10 years?
I suppose, and I'll let Anya come in on that as well. I suppose when we're looking at demographics, we look essentially at what's the capacity of the existing school system before we look at new schools. So that's our first protocol. If you look at demographics overall, the bulge has already been there for the last few years, and it has worked its way through primary. In terms of first years, and just say focusing on first years, just to give a sense of where the bulge is at, 2013 or thereabouts would have been the peak year for junior infants at primary level, and working that through to post-primary, over the next year or two, we're more or less at the peak year in terms of the enrolments at post-primary, and then that'll work its way through. Now, we're still on an upward curve overall, and then there's also, as I said earlier, Ukrainian children. There's over 1,000 Ukrainian children in our 6th class at primary level that'll be feeding into the post-primary system as well. And then there's all the housing developments and how that impacts on provision as well. So to answer your question, it really depends on how those particular demographics land in a particular area that sort of determines the number of new schools. And our typical approach is to provide the new post-primary schools at scale of 1,000 pupils or thereabouts. So it takes quite a bit of demographic requirement to justify a new 1,000 pupil school.
Okay, so it's not really possible to put an overall.
In fairness, it depends on the local area and the particular pressures. But the strategic development zones and all of them, that we'd have a pipeline. And back in 2018, we announced a cohort of new schools to be delivered, and some of those haven't yet been delivered or on the base in terms of being established, essentially because the related housing that was intended to be in place in 21, 22 hasn't yet happened. So there's, that there'll be a cohort of schools that'll be coming through, but they'll be coming through over time and to align with the housing developments.